Pacifica, this is Democracy Now!
I just returned from covering an ethnic cleansing campaign in the Democratic Republic of Congo. During this campaign, hundreds were killed, thousands of homes burned down, hundreds of villages attacked, hundreds of thousands of people driven from their homes, either into internal exile or made refugees driven outside the country. And all of this suffering was exacerbated by neglect from the international community and especially the America First policies of the Trump administration.
A slaughter in silence. We'll speak to journalist Nick Turse about how a brutal ethnic cleansing campaign in the Democratic Republic of Congo was made worse after the U.S. abruptly cut support for peacekeeping efforts last year as part of President Trump's America First policies. Then to Emilio Gutierrez Soto, the journalist who fled certain death in his native Mexico. He's just been released after 7 months in an immigrant detention center in Texas with his son.
Life in that concentration camp is extremely harsh. What the immigration authorities seek is to finish you off psychologically, and we're trying to resume our lives in liberty, in semi-liberty.
And then to North Dakota, where the body of Native American mother Olivia Lone Bear has been found in the bottom of a lake after a 9-month search. Her disappearance sparked renewed attention to the disproportionately high rates of disappearance, rape, and murder of Native American women across the United States. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. The Environmental Protection Agency said Thursday it'll freeze Obama-era fuel economy standards at 2020 levels in the latest blow by the Trump administration against efforts to curb catastrophic climate change. Under previous rules, the U.S. was on track to double fuel mileage standards to an average of nearly 55 miles per gallon by 2025. Under the new rules, automakers will be allowed to continue selling cars and light trucks in the U.S. that average about 30 miles per gallon. The Trump administration also plans to revoke California's authority to set its own tougher automobile emission standards. California Governor Jerry Brown said his state would lead 17 other states in a legal challenge against the move, tweeting, "California will fight this stupidity in every conceivable way possible." United Nations officials have condemned President Trump's rhetoric against the media. In a joint statement, UN Special Rapporteurs at the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, David Kaye and Edison Lanza, said of Trump, quote, "These attacks run counter to the country's obligations to respect press freedom and international human rights law. We're especially concerned that these attacks increase the risk of journalists being targeted with violence," unquote. Their warning came as Trump continued to assail the media. This is Trump speaking at a campaign rally in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, Thursday evening.
There has never been, and even these people back here, these horrible, horrendous people, even these people back there stand, look at it. It looks like the Academy Awards. There's so many. You ever see this? But they can make anything bad because they are the fake, disgusting news.
Trump's attacks came as his daughter, senior White House advisor Ivanka Trump, said she doesn't share her father's views that the press is the enemy of the American people. Ivanka Trump was speaking at an event held by the website Axios. During her interview, she also describes her father's policy of separating immigrant families at the U.S.-Mexico border as a low point of her time at the White House.
Yes, that was a low point for me as well. I feel very strongly about that, and I am very vehemently against family separation and the separation of parents and children. So I would agree with that sentiment. I think immigration is incredibly complex.
In Texas, immigrant rights groups say more than 500 fathers and sons who were separated at the U.S.-Mexico border, then reunited inside a for-profit immigration jail, have launched a strike and are refusing orders from ICE and guards from the Geo Group Corporation. The fathers are reportedly refusing meals, saying they've been denied their right to apply for asylum, have not been notified about their immigration status, and that ICE officials misled them into agreeing to deportation in exchange for reuniting with their children. Their sons refused to participate in classes Thursday. This is audio of one of the fathers obtained by the immigrant rights legal support group, RAICIS.
What worries me is that we are restrained from our freedom as human beings. Our children are crying. It is so bad in here. We are told that one of the detainees' sons tried to hang himself. I have talked to the other detainees, and there is a plan. We will not be eating, and everyone has agreed.
Immigration and Customs Enforcement officials have denied a hunger strike is taking place inside Carnes. On Thursday, ICE said in a statement fewer than 50 people had participated in a brief sit-in protest and later dispersed. Meanwhile, ProPublica reports a youth care worker for Southwest Key has been charged with molesting at least 8 unaccompanied immigrant boys in Arizona. The worker is HIV positive, prompting fears he may have transmitted the virus to the boys he sexually assaulted. In Yemen's port city of Hodeidah, bombers with the Saudi-led U.S.-supported coalition struck near the city's main public hospital Thursday. Medics say the assault killed at least 55 people while wounding 126 others. This is the survivor of the attack.
I was rescuing people when the second airstrike happened. Its impact sent shrapnel flying into my face, making me bleed a little. I couldn't feel my hand because of the shrapnel.
The latest civilian deaths came as the UN warned more than 8 million Yemenis are now experiencing extreme hunger as a result of the ongoing conflict, with millions more at risk of contracting cholera, as the U.S.-backed war on Yemen has created the world's worst humanitarian disaster. Zimbabwe's Electoral Commission has declared Emerson Mnangagwa the winner of Monday's national election. Mnangagwa served as vice president under longtime leader Robert Mugabe. He emerged as interim president after Zimbabwe's military seized government buildings and deposed Mugabe last November. Opposition parties have rejected the outcome, questioning the vote count. On Thursday, police raided the headquarters of the Movement for Democratic Change in Harare, accusing party leaders of inciting violence. The raid came as the death toll in a bloody crackdown by soldiers on Wednesday's post-election protests rose to 6. In Nicaragua, hundreds of students protested in the streets of Managua Thursday, calling on President Daniel Ortega to resign. The latest protest came as international human rights groups say more than 300 people have been killed by police and government-backed paramilitaries since anti-austerity protests erupted in April. The UN Refugee Agency says the violence has driven some 23,000 people to flee to neighboring Costa Rica, where some 200 Nicaraguans are applying for asylum each day. An international group of conservationists is warning nearly every species of lemur is under threat of going extinct as human development encroaches on their territory on the island of Madagascar. The primate specialist group reported Thursday that logging, slash-and-burn agriculture and mining has left 105 of 111 lemur species vulnerable to extinction. In Mexico, President-elect Andrés Manuel López Obrador says he's preparing to ban the oil and gas drilling method known as hydraulic fracturing or fracking. Environmental groups celebrated the announcement, with Food and Water Watch Director Winona Howder telling Desmog blog, quote, "The plan to ban fracking in Mexico represents the latest common-sense decision by a world leader to prohibit this inherently toxic, polluting practice." In Pennsylvania, an environmental activist and grandmother has been jailed for fighting a fracked gas pipeline being built in part on her own land. 63-year-old Ellen Gerhardt was arrested last week after the company Sunoco accused her of violating a court order banning her from interfering with workers building the Mariner East 2 pipeline, which will run across the state. Gerhardt has led the fight to stop the pipeline since Sunoco seized part of her land for construction using eminent domain. Sunoco is owned by Energy Transfer Partners, the company behind the Dakota Access Pipeline. Gerhardt remains in jail on $25,000 cash bail. CBS reported record revenues Thursday, exceeding investors' estimates of quarterly earnings and driving up share prices of the media company. CBS announced the earnings on a conference call that included longtime CEO Les Moonves, who's been accused of sexual assault and harassment by at least 6 women who say he forcibly kissed or touched them during business meetings and physically and professionally threatened them after they rejected his sexual advances. During Thursday's call, not a single reporter asked Moonves about his alleged sexual misconduct, instead allowing him to speak at length about CBS's earnings. The allegations against Moonves were revealed in a New Yorker investigation by Ronan Farrow that also uncovered sexual harassment claims against CBS 60 Minutes executive producer Jeff Fager. The New Yorker reports Fager made unwanted advances towards employees and protected other men accused of sexual misconduct. And in Massachusetts, Smith College has apologized to a black student who was racially profiled on campus. The student, Amu Kanute, was eating her lunch in her dormitory's common room on Tuesday when a campus employee called police reporting someone who, quote, seemed out of place. After an officer arrived on the scene and confronted her, Kanute began recording the episode, later posting it on Facebook with a statement that read in part, "All I did was be black." This is Amu Kanute speaking with CBS Boston.
It just still upsets me to just talk about it because I don't even feel safe on my own campus and I'm away from home. I'm the first in my family to go to college. I'm doing this not only for me, but for my family, for my ancestors.
In a statement, Smith College President Kathleen McCartney offered Kanute an apology, adding, "This painful incident reminds us of the ongoing legacy of racism and bias in which people of color are targeted while simply going about the business of their daily lives," unquote. Kanute demanded Smith release the name of the staffer who called police on her, but the college has so far refused. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. We begin in the Democratic Republic of Congo, which is facing one of the worst humanitarian crises in the world. Between 1998 and 2003, the DRC suffered what has been described as the deadliest conflict since World War II. More than 5 million Congolese died. Well, 15 years after the war ended in Congo, the country is facing another massive crisis, a wave of extreme violence sweeping the DRC. Last year, 2 million Congolese fled their homes. Nearly 7 million Congolese are now internally displaced. Another 500,000 have fled to other parts of Africa. According to the United Nations, 13 million Congolese are in urgent need of humanitarian aid. The international media has largely ignored what's happening. But this week, Vice News published a shocking investigation into a recent case of ethnic cleansing where hundreds of machete-wielding militiamen swept through areas in Congo near the Ugandan border. About 120 communities were attacked, with hundreds killed, thousands of homes destroyed, some 350,000 people displaced. The violence came after the U.S. abruptly cut support for peacekeeping efforts in the Congo and elsewhere last year as part of President Trump's America First policies. For more, we're joined by Vice News contributor, author Nick Turse. His article is headlined, "A Slaughter in Silence, How a Brutal Ethnic Cleansing Campaign in DRC Was Made Worse by Trump's America First Policies and the World's Neglect." He's also author of the book, Next Time They'll Come to Count the Dead, War and Survival in South Sudan. Nick, welcome back to Democracy Now! Explain exactly what you've uncovered.
Well, I went to the Democratic Republic of Congo earlier this year to cover existing conflicts and the resulting refugee crisis. But I found myself witness to an unfolding ethnic cleansing campaign in the far east of Democratic Republic of Congo, a place called the Tori province, and specifically a region called Jugu Territory. And there, the minority Hema community was being attacked relentlessly. In the time I was there, sometimes more than one attack per day on villages. There were about 120 attacks during this campaign. Hundreds were killed. Hundreds of thousands were driven from their homes. Most of them became internal exiles inside of Congo, and then about 50,000 or so were driven across the border into Uganda.
Who's doing this?
Well, it's a very murky circumstance trying to find who's exactly behind this. When you talk to most people there, they say that that it isn't an ethnic conflict, which it's been portrayed as outside of the country. They say that there's an invisible hand behind it. And when you delve into that further, basically what it's meant is that powerful politico-military forces are behind this. Many people link it to President Joseph Kabila, who's stayed in office as president 2 years beyond his legal mandate. And he has there's an election coming up, presidential election in December. A lot of people think that this violence was orchestrated to help postpone that election or upend it completely.
How would it do it?
Well, they're trying, at the time that this violence broke out, the head of the Electoral Commission in the capital, Kinshasa, came out and said, if there's violence in a Tory province, then there's a good chance that we can't hold elections because there'll be too many, the population will be displaced, and we have to focus our resources on quelling the unrest there. And at the exact same time, unrest broke out in a Tory province. A lot of people thought that was too much of a coincidence to be strictly a coincidence.
I want to turn to an earlier report on Vice News tonight describing the violence in the Tory province. A word of caution to our TV viewers. Some of these images are extremely graphic.
The Lendu and Hema are two neighbouring ethnic groups who fought one another in the past. But since 2007, they've lived in relative peace. Not anymore. The Lendu militia has been targeting the Hema since December, burning villages and killing more than 250 people. Just days before we arrived in Marze village, a Lendu militia allegedly slaughtered more than 40 Hema villagers. It was one of the worst cases of ethnic violence in recent memory.
They came in with the machetes. In this village, we lost. Yes, there are many women, and among the women, many are elderly.
David Itsobwa lost 15 family members and has been investigating the massacre for human rights groups.
There were also children up to 2 years, 3, 4, up to 20 years. There's another who lost a wife and children. He has also lost a child.
Can you elaborate on this, Nick?
Yeah, this was one of the largest of the massacres. It was a village called Maze, and people I spoke to said that 50 or more people were killed there. And the killings that were going on in Congo were especially brutal. I mean, we're talking about, it's a world where war is increasingly associated with drones and smart bombs and cyber attacks, but the war on civilians that I witnessed there was carried out by militiamen who were wielding machetes, axes, bows and arrows, and spears. It was as brutal as it was merciless, and the militiamen there were attacking, women, children, the elderly, without compunction.
Tell us some of the stories of the people you met with, the horror of their limbs being chopped off.
Yeah, there was, there are so many stories that stick with me, but one, it was a family who tried to flee an attack on their village, Che, which isn't very far from Maze, which we just saw there in the clip. And the family was confronted by these militiamen on the way out of town, and 4 family members, the mother and 3 children, were killed during this. An 11-year-old girl, the eldest daughter in the family, was attacked. She was cut several times, including militiamen cut off one of her hands. She woke up and she told me that she saw bodies scattered all around, including her mother. She went over to her mother and found that her young sister, a 2-year-old, had been gravely wounded but was still alive. And she took a piece of fabric off her mother's body, wrapped up her sister onto her back, and then helped several other survivors in the village. She also found her father and eventually brought help to him. Other men who had fled the village had come back. She brought the men to him, and it saved all of their lives.
I want to go back to Vice News correspondent Aris Orsini, who visited an overcrowded refugee camp, which is home to thousands of people, mostly Hema, who fled from Lendu attackers.
This tent is filled with families who bear some of the most brutal injuries.
Can you tell me what happened to you?
They killed my wife and 3 children. They started to cut me with a machete and the child who was in my hand.
Nine Richard's 2-year-old daughter, Rachel, now has these permanent scars to her face and skull.
We were being chased.
Her older sister, 11-year-old Marve Grace, watched her pregnant mother get hacked to death.
I stopped when I saw that they were cutting my mother. But when they saw I stopped, they started cutting me too. That's how they cut my hand. Since there is still a war, I cannot go back home.
That report from Vice News, Nick Terse.
Yes, that was the family that I was speaking of, and Mave Grace was the one who saved her entire family. She saved other people from the village. She found a young boy who was gravely wounded and wandering through. She helped him. She told me that there were others that she couldn't save. She saw a boy who both of his legs were cut off, and she said she wanted to help, but she knew there was nothing that she could do. And these stories I was told again and again in village after village. I mean, it was just incredibly violent.
So what does this have to do with U.S. policy?
Well, experts that I talked to said that U.S. policy exacerbated this ethnic cleansing campaign. Because in 2017, the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, Nikki Haley, pushed for and won dramatic cuts to the UN peacekeeping budget. She took to Twitter afterwards to celebrate having cut $500 million from peacekeeping efforts and said this was only the beginning.
Let me turn to Nikki Haley, speaking earlier this year.
Peacekeeping is a shared responsibility. With shared responsibility comes shared burdens and shared costs. One country should not shoulder more than 1/4 of the UN peacekeeping budget, and we look forward to a more equitable distribution of the budget among member states. Moving forward, the United States will not pay more than 25% of the peacekeeping budget. This is a cap required by U.S. law.
That's the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, Nikki Haley. Nick Terse.
Yes, these cuts were severe, but even UN officials that I talked to and outside experts said that they were manageable if they were done with some sort of orderly process. But the United States pushed for these cuts to be very severe and very fast, and because of that, the UN peacekeeping mission, I was told, had to move its forces and close down bases in a very haphazard fashion, that this had to be done very fast. Because of this, bases were shut down in a Tory province just before this violence broke out. And the people that I talked to, the experts said that this hampered the response, that there could have been a faster UN response. And again, I should mention that these attackers were armed with traditional weapons, axes, arrows, machetes. UN peacekeepers are armed with modern automatic weapons. Most people said that if there was a robust peacekeeping presence, they would have saved lives because the attackers wouldn't have been able to stand up to them.
Who supports this overall UN peacekeeping force? It's called MONUSCO?
Yes, MONUSCO is supported in large part by the United States, but other members of the international community also contribute to this force. But it was the U.S. that really led the charge to cut this budget. They said it was bloated, and they said that this was part of the America First agenda, that America shouldn't be shouldering this type of financial burden.
I mean, you think back to the history of the Congo over a century ago, when the Belgian King Leopold considered it his private fiefdom and killed, well over 10 million Congolese. Right. The symbol of that time, the cutting off of hands.
Yeah. So you're seeing that, more than a century later, the same type of violence being meted out. And, back then the United States was the first country in the world to recognize Leopold's claim on the Congo and supported his effort. And I couldn't help but see some sort of symmetry in that.
So what are people there calling for right now? And if you could place not only the Ituri province for us within Congo, but Democratic Republic of Congo within Africa geopolitically and its significance.
Sure. I mean, the Congo is a huge country. It's about the size of Western Europe. So it's massive.
All of Western Europe.
All of Western Europe would fit inside the Democratic Republic of Congo. It's in the heart of Africa, a tremendously large place, poor country in terms of GDP, not poor when you look at the resources under the ground. There's $24 trillion worth of mineral wealth beneath the ground in Congo. So there are always a lot of multinational corporations are interested in getting into Congo, but Congo has been plagued by rulers who don't leave power and recurrent violence over the years.
At this point, your work in Africa has gone on for years. You wrote a book about South Sudan. You've written about, in the last year, the U.S. presence in Africa overall. Can you talk about that, even as it cuts aid to UN peacekeeping forces?
Yeah, the United States has had a robust military presence across the continent. It looks like that may be scaled back in the coming months as the U.S. pivots more towards near-peer competitors like Russia and China. But actually, I just checked in with U.S. Special Operations Command, and the number of commandos operating in Africa is the same as it was last year. So there have been talks about cuts, but we haven't seen them yet. The United States has this presence as the idea behind it is counterterrorism. They haven't been all that successful. There's actually a proliferation of terror groups across the continent, and missions over the years haven't been all that successful. The United States, just a couple of years ago, was heavily involved in Central Africa, including a small presence in Congo. It was aligned against Joseph Kony's Lord's Resistance Army. After close to $1 billion spent, the United States was unable to capture or kill Kony. The LRA goes on, but that U.S. presence has faded.
And you've written in your previous work, more U.S. commandos are deployed to Africa than to any other region of the world except to the Middle East.
That's right. It's been rapid growth since 9/11. At that time, about 1% of U.S. commandos deployed overseas were in Africa. And now it's running about 16%, more than any place other than the war zones in the greater Middle East.
From your travels there, what do you think needs to be done right now in the DRC?
Well, it's humanitarian aid is what people are asking for. It wasn't just these UN peacekeeping cuts that caused a tremendous amount of suffering there, but international aid to Congo has been dropping precipitously over the last years. If you look at last year's numbers, the average Syrian in need of humanitarian assistance received $305. The average Congolese in need of it received about $62. Now, I don't begrudge Syrians in need any amount of money, but there's a real disparity there. And experts that I talked to said, people just don't care about the Congo.
Nick Turse, thank you for being there and for reporting this horrific story. Nick Turse, Vice News contributor and author, his latest article headlined "A Slaughter in Silence: How a Brutal Ethnic Cleansing Campaign in DRC Was Made Worse by Trump's America First Policies and the World's Neglect." He's also author of the book, "Next Time They'll Come to Count the Dead: War and Survival in South Sudan." This is Democracy Now! When we come back, a Mexican journalist seeking political asylum in the United States is freed by court order after 7 months in a detention center with his son. He'll speak to us live from El Paso. Stay with us.
And while I'm here on earth, I rejoice in its worth, 'cause freedom is free. Freedom is free. You can't take that away from me. You got your guns up on display, but you can't control how I feel, no way, 'cause freedom is free. Freedom is free. You can't take that away from nobody.
Freedom is Free by Chicano Batman here on Democracy Now!, democracynow.org. I'm Amy Goodman. As we go to Texas, where Mexican journalist Emilio Gutierrez Soto and his son Oscar have been released from ICE detention after being jailed for 7 months. Gutierrez Soto first sought asylum in the United States in 2008 after receiving death threats for reporting on alleged corruption in the Mexican military. He was detained in December only weeks after he criticized U.S. asylum policy during a speech at the National Press Club. The federal judge who ordered his release questioned whether the Trump administration's detention of Emilio Gutierrez Soto and his son Oscar violated his First Amendment rights. Well, on Wednesday, I spoke with Emilio Gutierrez Soto in El Paso, Texas, and began by asking him how it feels to be free.
Well, thank you for this invitation. It's a little weird, having been 7 months and some days at the ICE concentration camp. We feel a bit unusual. The way of life in that concentration camp is extremely harsh. What the immigration authorities seek is to finish you off psychologically, and we're trying to resume our lives in liberty, in semi-liberty practically, because we continue to be supervised by the immigration authority, in this case, internal security through ICE.
And can you describe the conditions that you were held in? Were you held together with Oscar, your son?
Yes. My son and I, since we entered the concentration camp, we were always together in the same facilities. The conditions in that place are truly denigrating. Day after day, we need to deal with or confront security of officers who are hired by a private company and who lack the basic ethical concepts that when it comes to respecting human rights. We've had to confront a situation where there is some presumed food, which was really practically garbage, in addition to being enclosed where the barracks within have sanitary services and the shower, or toilet and shower, which causes constant contamination when it comes to internal development or any thought of pursuing intellectual development or of any sort of mental reflection in these places. These are really places in which there is an effort to totally destroy those who have the misfortune of reaching those places, destroying them both psychologically and physically.
Emilio, can you talk about why you were jailed in December? You had just been honored in Washington, D.C. In fact, I want to turn to your speech in October at the National Press Club as you accepted the National Press Club's John Aubuchon Press Freedom Award on behalf of Mexico's journalists. This is what you said then.
The exiles is a constant suffering and source of pain for our families.
Doña Impunidad no nos ha dejado de la mano.
Lady Impunity has not let go of our hand.
Mientras la justicia, Doña Justicia, se prostituye acompañada del Estado.
While Lady Justice prostitutes herself in the company of the government.
Los medios, para rematar la libertad de expresión,
to again kill the freedom of expression.
Quienes buscamos asilo político en países como este,
those who seek political asylum in countries like this, like the United States,
nos encontramos con la cerrazón de autoridades migratorias.
We encounter the decisions of immigration authorities
que regatean las leyes internacionales.
That barter away the international laws.
So, Emilio, that is you, Emilio Gutierrez Soto, receiving an honor from the National Press Club in October. You were then detained in December. Do you believe there was a connection between the two events?
I I think so. It's been quite clear that after receiving a recognition of that nature and of that importance, we had a visit, a contact, supervisory contact visit from ICE, and immediately they put the handcuffs on us, took our photographs, and practically took us a few meters from the international border, the argument being that we were being deported when there was already a motion before the Court of Appeals in order to stop such deportation and so that we could continue our proceeding in liberty. What was attempted on that occasion was once again to cut short or to cut off my freedom of expression, a freedom which I have continued to exercise in Mexico and in the United States. I believe that the work of journalists is to speak the truth, to act with the truth, and especially to cast light on the truth for those who listen to us on the radio, those who read us, those who see us or watch us on television. We journalists have a major commitment all around the world to do the best we can, carrying out our job honestly. I think that it was one more reprisal on the part of ICE. After having continued in an asylum request process for 10 years, ours has been the longest, most drawn-out, most tedious asylum process, and in particular the one that where we have put forward the most evidence before the immigration judge that we did not come to the United States looking for a green card. We came to save our lives, the lives which, for the Mexican state, turned out to not be important. So important has the work of journalists been in Mexico for the Mexican authorities that we have more than 125 journalists who have been assassinated in the last 10 years, and in respect of whom there is total impunity, both in my home state of Chihuahua as well as throughout the country. I feel that it was a major reprisal by the United States government on speaking out and demanding that international law in relation to political asylum be respected. These are laws that the United States has proclaimed and said should be accepted in other countries, but cannot be accepted as a moral claim or protest in this country, the United States.
Emilio, you have been detained during this historic period of the Trump administration imposing what he calls the zero-tolerance policy, where thousands of children were taken from their parents at the border. Still, hundreds of them, if not over 1,000, have not been returned to them. Parents either deported or sent to 17 different states. We don't know how many states children were sent to. You were watching this from your own detention. Were parents and children coming into the detention facility, the jail you were in? And what were your thoughts as a journalist and as a human being watching all of this unfold from behind bars?
Mire, es algo que particularmente me sensibiliza mucho.
Well, it's something that I feel extremely sensitive about. 10 years ago, my son and I came into this country, and the first, I found myself before an immigration officer when they asked us what did we have with us, and I said we had fear. After having been in a freezer room all day long, under conditions of below freezing, my son and I were transferred to a prison in Canutillo, and I was transferred to the prison in El Paso, Texas. We were separated, my son and I. My son, at the time, an adolescent. Today, when my son and I were locked up all this time, I've been able to see how my son survived the pain of seeing how his father was separated. The only moral support that he had in his incipient life We have now once again shared the intense pain that affects thousands of families that have been separated by a stupid policy, a criminal policy that is being used against families. All they are seeking is just a grain of justice, the justice that is denied in our countries because of the predatory policies that begin in this country. It's a total aberration that the United States, a Christian country, that its authorities have no idea whatsoever of what Christianity is, of what it means to love your fellow human beings. The separation of families is an aberration. We and my son, we experienced that wrenching experience during a 7-month period in 2008.
So, Emilio, now you are free, and you have been offered a Knight Wallace Fellowship at the University of Michigan. Are you able to go to Michigan from Texas? Will you be able to go to school, and is your son going with you?
We are hoping that the immigration authorities...
Somos una familia, mi hijo y yo.
Well, my son and myself, we are a family, and we have every intention to get to Michigan. We hope that in coming days, the immigration authorities, particularly ICE, will return to us our Social Security cards and the other documents that they confiscated from us that they did not give us a week ago. And we hope that with that, we'll be able to travel to Michigan and take advantage of this life opportunity and take advantage of this educational opportunity. And if possible, become fully engaged once again in U.S. society.
You are also in detention through the historic election of AMLO, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, who will be the next president of Mexico. Soon after he was elected, the head of Homeland Security, Kristen Nielsen, the Secretary of State, Pompeo, the senior advisor to Trump, his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, all went down to meet with the president-elect, with AMLO. Can you talk about his election and also what you see will happen and what this means for U.S.-Mexico relations?
Mire, México, a través de Andrés Manuel.
Well, look, Mexico through Andrés Manuel, well, I have followed his AMLO's political history, and I have felt closely identified with him in terms of the social policies that he has proposed. I believe that Mexico is going to draw a clear line vis-a-vis what Trump wants and what we need to do with Mexico. Mexico, in recent years, has practically been supervised and under the yoke of the United States. I think that's going to change. Even though Trump has had some ideas in those approaches to López Obrador, I feel that López Obrador, because of the social support that he has had through the ballot box, is going to be obligated to follow through with the country in respect of things which have been denied to us. I'm speaking specifically of social justice. There is a tremendous debt in terms of security. There's a huge debt in terms of health, education, and I think we're going to begin there. And among other very important things, our energy resources, which have been practically given away to countries like the United States and Canada through the North American Free Trade Agreement. We Mexicans need to reclaim our oil, our electricity, our hydrological resources, and especially our mining, which has practically been turned over totally to Canadian interests. We need to negotiate that. And I think that AMLO, López Obrador, has set those goals clearly, and he needs to follow through on them, because he has offered that.
The number of journalists who've been killed in Mexico since you were detained, I think the number now is 8. Journalists gunned down who face the fate that you were afraid of if you were deported to Mexico. Can you comment on the level of violence in Mexico and what you think needs to happen to address this?
La violencia en México la generó un presidente borracho como Felipe Calderón.
Violence in Mexico was brought about by a drunk president, Felipe Calderón, and then there was a corrupt president, Enrique Peña Nieto, who has presided over further violence. They have not had the intention of offering any justice whatsoever. Impunity is what has accompanied journalists throughout this time. We were about to be deported, and with that, it's practically turning us over to those who were looking for me to kill me, which is the Mexican army. The Mexican consulate in El Paso is an agency that is totally at the service of ICE. It does not protect the interests of Mexicans at all. The consul it takes great pleasure in being friends with William Joyce, who's the field director of ICE. We Mexicans continue being aliens for those who are in charge of the consulate. And the consulate obviously works with the immigration services of Mexico and the customs services of Mexico, which are mostly in the hands of military officers. We were about to be put in the hands of our executioners with the nod of the consulate. This is something which caused me personally great fear, because I was practically, the life of my son was practically being put in the hands of the Mexican army, a life which has nothing to do with the work that I have done over many years in Mexico in my work as a journalist.
And finally, Emilio, what message do you have for people outside of detention centers? What should we understand about what's going on in the detention centers, what you call the concentration camps of the United States?
Creo que tenemos que sensibilizarnos.
I believe that we need to become more aware and to implement Christian values above all else, which have been at the foundation of the laws, regulations, and conduct of this nation. We have such a moral commitment on our part, particularly my son and myself, to raise awareness and foster greater solidarity among human beings as a way of strengthening our peoples, our education, and our social conduct. We have a lot of work to do still with churches, with students, with all of society in general. We have that commitment, and we intend to do so with whoever wishes to listen to this voice that speaks out as a form of free expression.
Award-winning Mexican journalist Emilio Gutierrez Soto. He's just been released from ICE detention with his son after being jailed for 7 months, released on court order. He's been awarded a Knight Wallace Fellowship at the University of Michigan and plans to move to Ann Arbor next month with his son. He can only go if ICE returns his documents. When we come back, we go to North Dakota, where the body of Native American mother of 5, Olivia Lone Bear, has been found in the bottom of a lake near her home after a 9-month search.
Remember me, when the sun comes up in the morning sky, there I will be, soaring with the eagle so high, feeling free. Remember me, down the road, hand in hand, you and me. Hey-oh, hey-oh, hey-oh. Hey, be oh, be oh, hey, oh, hey. Hey, be oh, be oh, hey, oh, hey.
Remember Me by Red Fawn, featuring Randy Wood and R. Carlos Nakai. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. We end today's show in North Dakota, where after a 9-month search, the body of Olivia Lone Bear was found Tuesday in a pickup truck submerged in a lake right near her home on the Fort Berthold Reservation. The mother of 5 went missing in late October in Newtown, North Dakota. Her disappearance has sparked renewed attention to the disproportionately high rates of disappearance, rape, and murder of Native American women across the United States, particularly in areas of oil extraction, like North Dakota's Bakken Shale, which is the origin point for the Dakota Access Pipeline. For more, we'll speak with her brother, Matt Lone Bear, who spent the last 9 months searching for his sister. He's joining us by phone from Newtown, North Dakota. And we go to Tulsa, Oklahoma, to speak with Mary Catherine Nagel, a citizen of Cherokee Nation, partner at Pipestem Law, a law firm dedicated to the restoration of tribal sovereignty and jurisdiction. We welcome you both to Democracy Now! Matt, I want to begin with you. Our condolences to your family on the death of your sister, Olivia Lone Bear. Can you talk about how she was found in this submerged truck right near her home?
As far as what we're told by law enforcement, Williams County, sent some divers in, and they were sent divers down, and then, then I got a text message saying that they're hooking up something, in the water. So then that's when I got there. But, as far as getting a debriefing from the police departments or anything like that, we still haven't gotten any word of how exactly everything went down. But
the reaction of your family to the discovery of Olivia's body?
Heartbreak. It's after 9 months of looking on our reservation, that's almost 1 million acres. And then come to find out that, we've been pushing for this water search since November, and lo and behold, she was found within a mile of her home.
What do you mean you were pushing? Who were you pushing to do the search of the lake?
Lead law enforcement was Tribal PD in the beginning, and then in January 2018, BIA took over, pushing with the BIA. And then
the Bureau of Indian Affairs.
Yeah, Bureau of Indian Affairs. And then we had the state's office involved.
And they have boats to do this.
What's that?
They have boats to do this.
Yep. And even our own tribal PD's got boats. We have boats available on our reservation, and none of them got on the water.
Why wasn't it done until now? Because when they did it, they found her almost immediately.
Mm-hmm. And there's so much red tape that went on, right toward the end here, we had Tribal PD and BIA pointing fingers about who's going to do the water search. And, they were chomping at the bit back in January. They said as soon as the water thaws out, we're going to be on the water. We're going to search the water 100%, which is a lot of water. But then, fast forward 3 months down the road, and they still had no boats on the water. They just, it just became accountability at that point, and I don't think anybody wanted to take accountability for all that water search. So as far as the family goes, we did what we had to do as far as doing a land search, but we don't have resources and or knowledge to do a water search, so we relied on law enforcement agencies to do this. And
do you feel they made the search of your sister Olivia Lone Bear a priority?
No, I don't think they did. Right toward the end too, our BIA agents were it was kind of a revolving door for the last month and a half, 2 months. Agents come in for 7 days and leave, and 2 weeks and leave. You can't learn 7 months, 8 months of a case in 2 weeks time or a week's time. So it just kind of showed us what kind of priority we were. We were never told if how long they're going to be there or anything like that. So it was just total confusion at the end.
I wanted to bring Mary Catherine Nagel into this conversation. You're a citizen of Cherokee Nation. You're with the Pipestem law firm. Can you talk about the broader issue of missing Indigenous women around the country?
Yes, thank you. And first, I just want to say, Matthew, I'm so sorry for your loss and your family's loss. And I know that this is not the resolution that anyone hoped for. But unfortunately, in Indian country, in some reservations, our women are murdered at rates 10 times the national average. The rates of violence, whether you're talking about just domestic violence or sexual violence, are incredibly high against our Native women. But the rates of murder and the rates at which our women go missing are even higher. And that's been documented by the Department of Justice, United States attorneys, United States senators who are fortunately now starting to propose legislation to deal with the crisis. But it is nothing less than a crisis when you think about the numbers and the percentages at which our women go missing and murdered.
Mary Catherine Nagel, can you address the issue of jurisdiction? Who investigates this?
And you can see here just how problematic it is when our own tribal police don't know whether or not they have jurisdiction. And I can't speak to all of the decisions that were made on the ground here, but I can say that in 1978, the United States Supreme Court stripped our nations of our inherent criminal jurisdiction over anyone who comes onto our lands and commit crimes. So that means that today, when a woman goes missing, if a Native woman goes missing, her tribal government cannot exercise any kind of police jurisdiction over that crime unless the government knows that the perpetrator was Native. And that's because the Supreme Court says we don't have jurisdiction over non-Natives who come onto our lands and kill our women or our children or really any tribal citizen. And depending on the circumstances, unfortunately, the federal legal framework around this has become incredibly complicated. And there have been pieces of jurisdiction that have been restored to tribal nations. For instance, in the 2013 reauthorization of the Violence Against Women Act, in that reauthorization, one piece was restored, and that's jurisdiction over domestic violence. So if a non-Indian commits a domestic violence crime, today tribal nations can prosecute that. However, murder was not restored. And so sex trafficking, that's another crime that our women suffer at disproportionate rates. If the perpetrator is believed to be non-Native, or if the tribal police cannot know with any kind of certainty that the perpetrator is Native, under federal law, they likely do not have jurisdiction to even arrest, let alone prosecute these crimes.
And is this a particular issue in areas of extraction, like oil extraction, like we see in the case of Olivia Lone Bear?
It is. And, there's been a lot of research to document and study that. And in fact, even the Department of Justice Office on Violence Against Women recently, they give out federal grant funding from the Violence Against Women Act to different domestic violence programs around the country, Native and non-Native. But in their recent proclamation that they were putting out different grants, they noted the increasingly high rates of violence and sex trafficking and domestic violence in the Bakken in particular, with the increase in oil production, and have allocated millions of extra dollars to DV and sexual assault programs in the Bakken out of a recognition that the rates are becoming extraordinarily high. I know Senator John Tester from Montana and Senator Heidi Heitkamp have both spoken openly about the increased rates of violence in the Bakken area, as well as former U.S. attorneys. And, it's not that difficult to wrap your brain around when you think about the fact that if you look at the Bakken, for instance, and this is true of any area where you have a rapid increase of extractive industries on tribal lands, because you have a situation where the tribal nation has been stripped of its jurisdiction. And for instance, in the Bakken, from 2009 till now, there have been more than 100,000 new workers who previously did not live in North Dakota or in the Bakken who have come to that region just to work in the man camps. And with them, they bring increased rates of crime, and one of them is domestic violence and sexual assault. And so it certainly overwhelms the law enforcement on the ground, but when you compact that with the fact that often our tribal nations are without jurisdiction based on the identity of the perpetrator, it really creates a crisis.
Mary Catherine Nagel and Matt Lone Bear, again, our condolences on finding the body of Olivia Lone Bear. I'm Amy Goodman. Thanks for joining us.